drive and pick them up if I could supply them for the same price that they were buying them. So set up accounts and loaded up a car full of donuts and started delivering them.
So how did you transition from that into selling speakers?
So this was like part of like part-time stuff from college. I may have been doing more of the donut thing, but I was going on vacation and I called a friend of mine to take over while I was gone and showed him the route, what we were doing. I also started picking up a 7-Eleven account, and then had to learn about buybacks, and business got a little more complicated with 7-Eleven than just dropping them off to people. So I went on vacation, I left him, here's my car, here's the route, and it took him about a week to 10 days to wreck my car, and everything just imploded. So I also learned about employees at a first venture too. So the speaker thing came about some years later. It wasn't a grand thing to start a speaker company. It was, I'd always been the person to research things, probably way too deeply. And so people would know if they were going to buy anything electronic or something. I was one of the guys that people would ask, what should I buy? So I would help them make purchases, and then you started to see a lot of similarities in the things that they're buying, and then again through just wholesale things you could figure out where are they buying things from. So I started to look into who's supplying them with these things. So I called a friend of mine who had a startup company. He made some speakers. He got more to the traditional route, had an investor, and they made some satellite speakers and a subwoofer amplifier, and this was like in early 1980s. And it took them about 2 years to go through all of the investment money, and you know how most things go that way. But he knew a lot more than I did, so I asked him, because I had been with him a little bit here and there at a show or two when he was doing his company, where are you buying these things? I know I've got people that would like to buy stuff maybe a little bit better than what they could normally go to a store and get. So found out some extra suppliers, and at this point people would just give me money and I would acquire their goods that they'd like, and then bring it to them, kind of like other hookup things work, right? Except this was, speakers and stuff. So he had another contact that we should go up and see that we're actually building some stuff and supplying motorhome companies. So we went up there, and they had more items available through their business. So I started buying some stuff from them, and so it took a couple $100, bought a load of things, designed some systems for people, and they would buy those things and go buy some more. And at this time, I was also going to some stores and finding out what they were selling. And at this point, in the mid-'80s, it wasn't as elaborate at all, car stereo things. There was Pioneer had some 6x9s and some coaxes that you could buy, but it wasn't really high-level stuff. So I had asked Paul, said, you were building these speakers with the woofers, tweeters, and crossovers. So I think this would sell to the stores if it was that easy for them, the car audio installers, instead of buying these, if we had all this as a kit. And you put your wires in here, wires come out here, all they have to do is install this, and it would be way better than what they were used to. So he did the engineering side then, and I was the sales and talk it up guy. So we got some stores. This is around San Diego. And we would go up to this one place, buy the component parts, make the crossovers in his garage, make up the kits, drop them off to the stores, collect some money, go back up, do it again. So one day we were up at this place, and they were making these plate speakers for Fleetwood Industries, which is a motorhome company. They make motorhomes for Winnebago and Pacero and things. So we were looking at these and how they were constructed, and I said, this might even be easier than having to put the woofers and cut holes and things. Because back then, if you remember in the 80s, door panels weren't all molded and things like they are now. It was just flat piece of wood or cardboard or something, So this had, originally they were made out of a piece of wood. It had the woofer there and the tweeter and the crossover built in the back. And they had just made some with the plastic injection mold. So we got some of those and tried them. In a motorhome, they're sitting up on the cabinets and things, so they're not subjected to the UV. So next time we were up there, I asked them if we order some of these, when you get them made, can you do them out of ABS plastic? And we could put them in a car and they won't warp. And they said, yeah, we can probably do that. So sometime later, they had some of those, and so I started taking this around to the stores. And those started to sell. This went on for a couple of months, and we were going out at Los Angeles and setting up stores. So we had 25 or 30 dealers around, and so now it was more than $200, a couple $1,000 turning this over. And this went on until we came up to pick up a load, and they said, we need to talk. Okay, this is the first time we've been in the conference room to talk. And a friend of theirs was a sales rep for Harman Kardon, and he saw our speakers in some of the stores and told them that this could probably sell really well nationwide. And we have a contract. Well, I didn't know anything about contracts. So our meeting was that we were being cut off and they were going to market these products nationwide. So they went to CES and had a booth, and we had some other ideas that we drew up for them. If you could make this and this and this, and when we saw their booth at CES, it had this and this and this and stuff in the booth. So that was our startup.
So where did you guys go from there? I think as we were talking earlier, there was a component in your evolution where you started making subwoofers for cars.
Yeah, so when we're in there talking to the owners and what else do you need that would make life easier, what kind of niches do you have? They said we could use some subwoofers that maybe handle more power, don't take as big of a box. So we had said, okay, you get a challenge and do some research. What's it going to take to make this that they're currently not getting? So there was a supplier in the U.S. that would build subwoofers to spec, and we had been doing enough business where we could actually buy a minimum order quantity from them. So we had a couple of models of those subs, and so we had still had the kits. We didn't have the plate speakers and things, and found another supplier for the kits, and then we had some subwoofers that we started selling. And then you kind of learn, later about designs and patents and things like that. So there was some of our customers were driving these things really hard, so they would burn them up, So I said, well, how are we going to keep this thing cool? So I drew up about maybe let's put some cooling vents in around the voice coil in the back plate. And so we did some drawings, sent them to our supplier guys, and they looked at it and said, that's kind of complicated, and might make noise, and we just don't think that's going to work. And about a year later, a big company had a patent on vented gap technology to keep their voice coils cool. So, and lost out on that one.
So how do you had several stories that I've heard, at least, of ideas that you've had that were really solid and changed the industry that didn't directly profit you like it seems like they should have. As an entrepreneur, how do you not get into a point where you're crying in the closet about someone stealing your idea and forge forward and keep innovating?
And I know when you're 20-something, it doesn't seem, you just go to the next problem. So, just shrug it off. Try to learn that, okay, I'm not just gonna make it so easy, you know.
So after that, what was next?
What was next? This is where, you know, things changed. One, when we started this, it was just something to do part-time going to school. So as this started to develop, I stopped college again at that time and just started doing this. And it's funny how things just move on a path, but at about the same time, or just before this other company took the one plate speaker to market, got a call from a guy in LA. He was a sales rep. He said, we're listening to I have a customer that bought some speakers from a store. He's an engineer, producer friend of mine. And he said, these car speakers sound better than the studio speakers he's using at his house, or at his studio. And he really likes them. He wants to know if we can make them into a box speaker that he would like, but if we can do that, he would like to sell those, you know, be a sales rep for us. So yeah, we can put them in a box. So got on the phone with Paul, said, we need to put these in a box. We need to find a cabinet maker and stuff. So there was some cabinet makers in California, so we just hit the road, started talking to them, and designed a cabinet, changed crossover a little bit, sent some speakers up to the guy for them to try. They really liked them. So as things were transpiring with one section going away, another one was opening up. At the same time, the subwoofers that we were doing, the company that we were contracting to build these, when we first called them up and said, look, we have some customers, but they're in the area that we're selling them in California. Like rap was just starting, heavy bass was just starting. So it was changing the way people were using their equipment, and most of the stuff that was available in the cars wasn't holding up that well. So I'd called them up and said, look, we need an 8-inch woofer, but what you guys currently build is just not strong enough for this market. So can you put what you usually do on a 10, this bigger motor, bigger voice coil, bigger parts, can you put this on this size of speaker? And what you normally do on a 12, can you do that on this 10? We need to upscale the whole thing. So they said, well, we haven't built that before, but I'll get with our engineers and we'll see if we can do that. And so, you know, they called us back and they said, yeah, everything is going to line up. We can do these parts. So we started buying those in small quantities and selling them around Southern California, and like in Compton and different places. Well, once they knew they could do that, some of the larger companies that they were already doing business with, they said, hey, we can build this now and this and this. And these guys could buy in bigger quantities. So, you know, things become a commodity at some point in the volume buying. So they could sell it to some of the places a lot cheaper than we could sell it at our volume levels. So we are at a crossroads again. What are we going to do? We kind of lost this one here, and now we got these guys just coming in and undercutting us on all this market. So it made the decision to pursue, like this is one of the speakers that we had built. And this one is probably from 1987 or something, 1988. Yeah, with this tweeter. So we thought we might have a better chance. The car audio side at that point, people were putting in money, so it was really starting to be directly proportional to your marketing ability is what you were going to sell. So there was no internet, there was no social media, there was nothing. There were, in those days, it was trade shows and magazines. So in order to create consumer demand, you had to be heavy in publications, which, $10,000 a page things in magazines. You had to be able to get to a lot of trade shows. You had to get, wherever you could to things. So we felt we had people liked this product. So with engineers, this was a tool, not just a recreational device. And if they were listening to speakers to uncover flaws in their mix. And with an engineer, if he felt this was really going to do them better, they would buy that. It didn't matter if they hadn't heard of us before. Whereas on the consumer side, it's a lot of the brand faith thing. So we thought, it's a slower growth area, but we at least have a fighting chance here as a smaller company. So we started then to really just pursue the studio and pro audio business.
So it seemed like a lot of the great speaker companies of the 80s and earlier 90s failed. What did you guys do that kept your company alive despite the same conditions that caused so many others to not make it?
Oh, when times got hard, we weren't making speakers anymore. We were just making the parts that go inside the speakers. So what most companies will do as you get a little bit bigger in the speaker side is people buy woodworking equipment and they start making their cabinets. So they've got a wood shop and they contract the other parts out. So the woofers, the tweeters, you can get built by OEM companies. The crossovers you can get built, and all those parts will arrive and they assemble it. And when we got to that point, I wanted to do more with the design of the parts and things. So one of the philosophies, not knowing anything about when you go into business, but back in the day, the only information you really had on things if you were looking at buying something was brochures, and everybody had brochures. So if you went to a store, you came back with a pile of brochures. And so as you look through the brochures, this company seems to find a thing to market on and hang their hat. We're the best because we have this widget thing in our deal, right? And the next one is the same way, well, we have this. And then the other one, they all have something that they're going to do. So I was looking at all those and I go, what if we just did all of that? What if we, did the rounded corners, then we mirror image, then we did this cone thing, we did this in the motor, and we did this and this and this. But that's really hard to get when you have to find people to make the stuff to spec, right? So, but that was our main philosophy was, let's just do everything that made engineering sense, just do it because it makes engineering sense. Maybe it's not marketing sense, but it actually makes things sound better. So that's what we did. So our next step was just build the transducers. But it's really, speakers and audio is something that we see a lot because we have to, it's the final interface from what we use, whether it's TV, it's radio, you have to make pressure waves in the air so we can hear it, right? So it's the last thing. But it's not such a big industry that you can't go to school anywhere where there's a program that teaches you how to do all this part of things. Because in a transducer, it's some electronic engineering, there's magnetics, there's mechanical engineering, there's composites, there's material engineering, so it's all kind of wound together. And there's really no place to go to learn that. So it's just trial and error. There were some companies that built drivers for us, and we could kind of see their production facilities. So when we decided to make the leap in talking to people, I think we're not going to do cabinets. I really want to do the drivers. People said, well, you're crazy. It's just, there's only a few people that build drivers out there, and it's because it's hard. Well, that actually sounds like the right way to go then, if the hard way, because everybody else is going to go the other way. And that's kind of what, long story short, turned out. When recessions happened and things slowed down, well, there wasn't as much market for this. It slowed down, but there was still companies out there, and they needed these. So in the years that we were just manufacturing the transducers, and again, there's only so many suppliers of these parts in the U.S. So, we were working with these guys for a while, and there's no databases then. Again, so there still wasn't an internet then. So if somebody needed to find somebody that manufactured things, the only way to find that out is like get on the telephone and start calling like suppliers, like basket companies and cone companies, like who's manufacturing stuff. And they would give them our name. And for the first 4 or 5 years we were doing it, we didn't want that kind of business. We weren't big enough to handle any business. Like some of you guys might relate, when you have 1 or 2 employees and you're doing everything from sales to technical support, all the manufacturing, cleaning the floors and locking the doors. It's like, no, we don't. There's nobody else to build any speakers. We're doing all we can. Till people stop calling to buy stuff, then you're going, oh, what are we going to do now? So start going back through the list of people that were calling to get stuff made. And yeah, exactly. Let's put on another hat and see what happens. So we started to build speakers for other companies, build the parts.
So how then did you get back full circle to car audio?
The market, the global market changed a lot. So in the 90s, so we're now kind of transitioning. We're still doing some of this, but we're building more drivers. So we're building drivers for like different industries, Martin Logan, some high-end car places. We did projects for Walt Disney. So if you go into a Disney vehicle, any of the rides, they got speakers in there, and outside they got speakers. So we made those speakers for those rides. It sounds easy at first, when they had sent us this little 4-inch speaker and said, "Can you guys make these?" Go, well, yeah, but you can get this made anywhere, for cheap. It's this little 4-inch speaker. I said, well, but we need it waterproof. It has to be insect proof. It has to be hurricane proof, UV proof. And when you build us a sample, we're going to bury it in a compost pile for a month and then test it and see if it works, and then do it again and test it, because that's what happens, in their environment. So yeah, it was a little more complicated. And so we got a hold of the suppliers and figured out, again, it's kind of engineering challenge. The wires have to be silicon coated, and the cone can't be made out of paper because insects can eat paper. And it can't be made out of plastic because plastic wouldn't hold up to the extreme temperature swings. So it needed to be made out of synthetic fiber. And there's a company in Wisconsin that we still use today. It was a great company. and they had some synthetic fibers that they could do, and so we got this thing working, and I think they're still playing in there, and we charged them a lot for those speakers. And I remember talking, it was Disney Imagineering, and we were in Anaheim one day talking to them, and I go, let's say we charge you, say, $80 for the speaker, and you can buy this for $8 somewhere else. And I go, why would you pay $80? And he goes, okay, if you look at it at the park, when something fails, and we have to pull that ride offline, so we got to stop, and the maintenance people have to pull us online, and we have to disassemble what you ride in, you know, and then change a speaker and put it all back, and it costs us, you know, $1,000 to do that. So going through all these extra hoops of what they wanted, you know, was well worth it to them. So those are things that you learn as you go along, but, you know, it just doesn't make sense. Why you pay us $80 to make this thing? So we were doing little projects like that for people, and some hardships started coming with our suppliers. So China, at that point in the 90s, starts making parts. You know, first it was Japan was a competitor, and then in Japan it went to Taiwan, because when labor got high in Japan, that was one of the first places. So, you know, Taiwan was building a lot of stuff, and some of the Taiwanese, you know, had gone back into China to expand their plants, because they could only go so far in Taiwan, and so the things were starting to change. And so we started noticing some parts, you know, at first were just, there was Chinese parts available, but everybody else was still going pretty strong. And as more and more of these parts started coming in, they started taking most of the lowest common denominator business. Like when it really didn't matter, they could do that part a lot cheaper. And where that hurt the US manufacturers is they had a lot of expertise there, and guys that have been in business for 30, 40 years. But the higher end stuff, like what we were doing, the $80 speakers, there's only so many of those things out there. But, you know, you got to do just the normal volume business too. And so China started taking a lot of the volume business away from these guys, and it started to really hurt their bottom lines. So slowly, the parts industry started to change. So we used to be able to buy the baskets, you know, and then there was 5 different basket companies, and then pretty soon, you know, one of them goes down and there's 4, and another one goes down and there's 3, and there was different magnet companies we could buy from. And, you know, one by one, you know, they start going down, and all of the industries were happening that way. So we started looking at it that, you know, China is not going to be satisfied as a parts vendor. I mean, if they can make the parts cheaper, they're going to be able to make the whole thing cheaper. You know, it's just inevitable. So the question is just when it's going to happen. So we were kind of thinking, like, what, we need to do something else, you know, before long. So we had all these guys that we were building for, and it's also tough, you know, as an OEM, your profit margins aren't that high, if any of you guys do stuff like that, right? So, you know, retail margin is one thing, but OEM, it's, you know, it's pretty thin. So you got the engineers always calling that they want more. And you got the purchase department calling and they want cheaper. And so this is constantly going on too. And then when you're making parts OEM, and we had, you know, people in these rows and conveyor things building stuff, on any given day, 20% of the people aren't going to show up. So that means one of us is in the seat, you know, to keep the line going, plus doing everything else. So we started looking for other things to do, and I talked to some other people in the industry as well, and they said, you know, everybody's going to have to find something else, you know, higher end. You're not going to be able to serve the lowest common denominator type products for long, because that you're just going to get replaced by the scale at which China can produce at. You know, it's just, you're not going to be able to compete with it. So we were struggling too to find out, well, what are we going to do? You know, this business hadn't picked up a whole lot. And I remember a friend of mine had invited me to a car audio show. And I said, car audio show? Yeah, it was like a contest and things. So I said, I'll go with you. So it was in town here. And we were walking around, and there's these guys with these cars that they'd spent just gobs of money on, like guys do. And they've got machined gear shift knobs and custom paint, and like right down to the little details. And then you open up the trunk and you look in there, and there's these lowest common denominator subs and things that we've been building for people because they want it built as cheap as you can possibly build something. And those are in their car, you know. And I thought, man, that's just, I thought we were building this just for people that were trying to have a cheap system, you know, but it's in these cars because there really isn't much else available. And then he introduced me to the guy that owned the car, and he said, this is a guy in town, they build speakers. And so this guy was a really audio nut, and his eyes just got big, and he looked at me like, oh, you build speakers? You live around speakers? I said, yeah, every day we live around speakers. He said, well, you must have built the world's most awesome speaker for yourself. And it was like, no, I haven't, you know. But I could, but I haven't. And I was thinking, like, why haven't I done something like that? So the more that played in my head that weekend, and it was like Monday, I came into work and said, yeah, I know what we're going to do. Let's just make, there's this new thing going around, this like internet thing. And maybe if we built something really good, we actually can get it to market, get people to know about it, which we couldn't do a few years ago. And see what happens, you know, like even before Field of Dreams, build it, you know, and see if they come. So we started looking for things like that to make, and first we built some, like, we'll back up a step, this lowest common denominator speaker that we're selling to these guys, and they're always complaining about how they break, you know, and that the kids aren't smart enough to use this stuff. And I remember telling them, would you like it made any better? I mean, it doesn't cost that much. We can make this where they're not going to break it. And so, well, how are you going to do that? I go, well, man, we built studio stuff for a long time. One of our trademarks was that, you know, it would last for a long time, because these guys use this stuff 24/7. And there's different things you do in suspension and motor. You can make these things last, but it takes a little extra money to do it, and they didn't want to spend any money on it. So then we built these really nice widgets, and so our first thing was, let's see if any of our customers would buy this. And we sent them these things, and they said, this is really, really nice, but nobody's going to buy it. It's just too expensive, and it's too sophisticated, and it's just not going to work. So after we got all the no's out there from everybody that it wasn't going to work, I said, that's a good thing. They don't think it's going to work. So let's just go the opposite way. So we built really cool widgets and went to a couple of shows, and, you know, started to get noticed.
Through that, how did you, or what have you learned over all this time on how to put a team together? What kind of advice would you give, you know, young founders around putting together their team?
That's another fireside chat you probably need to have with Vicki, because she's our ace team builder. But it's just finding, when you find good people, you know, just work with them. Takes people.
So how many years do you think you were in business before you got to a point where you were paying yourself a fair market wage?
It was years and years, 20 years. Yeah, we didn't, I was fortunate, we didn't have funds, so we didn't do the investor route. We had opportunities to do the investor route. When we were doing the studio monitors, we had a company that approached us to do the sales and marketing, and it's pretty common in audio. There's sales reps that do a lot of the legwork and go out there. So they had a sales team in place, so we made some agreements with them, and then they wanted to put in money and buy part of the company, and we talked about it, and it's like those things just seem to end up going one direction. Once you start there, eventually they're going to just take over. And even if you don't do it through equity, one of the things we learned, because they were our sales and marketing arm, right? So after a bit, if it's all their accounts, they pretty much own you anyway, because everything you sell through them. So if they just stop one day, then it's going to stop. So well, now we're just working for somebody again. I wasn't really good at working for people, so we chose the slow go route. Let's just build up and just be our own thing.
So if you had it to do over again, would you bootstrap it the second time too?
Would have probably picked something other than manufacturing.
So my next question was,
you can't sell something until you build it. That just, start learning later on. This takes capital. It takes, so, our capital was cash flow. I mean, we just had to keep, hopefully you sit there, you just don't make big mistakes. Those big mistakes just comes crashing down. But there, yeah, when we started this, there wasn't really software and things. The computer thing was just starting, and it was mainly hardware. So like, the stories like Bill Gates on hardware, and then Jobs and some other guys said, well, we think this software thing is really going to be where it's at. But, that's probably where put some time in the software.
So what benefits do you see from your perspective of doing business here in Oklahoma? I know you guys came from California, and I'm just kind of curious, what is good about being here in Oklahoma?
Oklahoma? It's a good business climate. It's quite a bit easier from a capital perspective too. When we moved here, I'd gone to high school here for a couple of years because my dad was in a job where he traveled a bit. So we built a house in Noble, and like in California, when they put up a housing development, it's like a manufactured thing. It's like people come in with cabinets and this, and it's like dirt, and 45 days later there's a house and there's grass and people are moving in, right? And he contracted a house to be built here, and they built that thing from scratch. Exactly. The cabinet maker came out, with a tape measure and a saw and a truck full of wood, and just made everything. So, which is how custom homes were done here. So when we were back in California and we were doing this in the late 80s, California, you heard, most people are aware of the motor vehicle pollution laws. So, they started there, but it wasn't just motor vehicles. So they went after, the whole industries were revamped. So the furniture industry at that time, they started requiring collectors, and like if you were spraying lacquers or any kind of solvent-based things, you had to collect that, and it couldn't get out in the environment. So within a couple of years, the furniture industry just left California. They couldn't afford to work there. So all of our cabinet makers were gone. So first thing we did, we went across the border to Mexico because a lot of maquiladoras had started up. And so a lot of the factories moved there. So that worked, but the quality was so-and-so. And when you get stuff across from the border of Mexico, if there's anything wrong with it and you got to take it back across the border, that's paperwork nightmare and a trucking nightmare. The Mexican trucks can come across the border and deliver here, but U.S. trucks can't go across the border. So you'd have to transfer goods, and it was just... So while we were doing this, I remembered, man, and I bet you we go back to Oklahoma City and we can find dozens of cabinet shops. So we took a trip back, and right about the same time, in like coincidence things, the Chamber of Commerce, the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce had an office in California, and they were trying to pull business back here after the oil bust had happened. And we met a guy, Richard Clemens, that works for the Commerce Department here, and so we'd like to come back. And so he had set up some appointments for us when we got here. And if you guys remember, Altec Lansing was here. Well, Oklahoma had been quite a hub of audio. There was University Sound was here before them, and it was in Altec. You know, James B. Lansing made his way through here, and that's why it became Altec Lansing from James Lansing. And then he left here and went to Northridge, California, and started JBL. So there's actually been a lot of audio stuff in this town. And Altec had some wood shops, but they also used a dozen shops around town. So it really was easy, because building speaker cabinets like this, in this cabinet here, there's no nails. So it's all with joinery and solid inlays, and you know how you build furniture, not just no nail guns and screws or anything. And because you don't want screws or nails that are can vibrate and change the sound. And these guys were already versed in that. And whereas in California and like in Mexico, I was spending months with cabinet makers teaching them how to build this kind of a cabinet. And these guys already knew how to do it. So that's the reason we moved back, because this was our primary business at the time. And yeah, it was easy. You could get a building for a lot less. The whole climate, you know, it worked out well.
So what do you think would improve the local entrepreneur scene, or make Oklahoma a better place to do business?
I don't know. I mean, it would depend on the business that you're in. Like for us, when we came, there was already infrastructure that, you know, I had no idea was here when we came, that just made that transition easy. But the thing that was tough outside of a few things and that we did face in Oklahoma was, since it was mainly oil-based, if the support businesses are not wide, you know, everything is kind of centered around the oil and gas. So if you're in a company that's outside of that, I imagine it would be a little harder. It's not as bad now. There's electronics business too. When we got here, Seagate was a major player here, and all the hard drive companies were here, and I think they employed tens of thousands of people then. Some of our first employees were guys that worked at the hard drive places. I guess Ted Davis Manufacturing is still here, but he ran a lot of that stuff then. So.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time today. Do you have a few minutes that we can have a question and answer session?
Sure.
Grayson.
Obviously, OEMs and car manufacturers have changed a lot over time. You know, you've got the single DIN, the double DIN, and now a lot of manufacturers don't have DIN-capable radios. How is that affecting your business, and are you guys agile and pivoting towards different things within the car audio industry?
It hasn't hurt us, but some years ago, just in looking forward of things, like we had opportunities, and you have to decide where you're going to invest, you know, for future growth. And I'd always looked at, you know, the head units in cars as something of a diminishing return as it went, because when technology changes, whole segments of our consumer audio industry become obsolete, you know, and, you know, from Betamaxes or, you know, there's so much stuff that after 5 years, it's just not there anymore. The comforting and safe thing about going back to speakers and staying in transducers and speakers is that you still have to move air. So we kind of avoided going too far down the source side, because the source seems to be what changes the most. And after the source side, it's the recording median side changes. So if you're in those, you really got to pivot and move and pivot and move and pivot and move. So what's happening today is there's really no head units. There's no even single DIN or double DINs. It's this whole graphic display in your car that now runs pretty much everything else of the car. So you can't even take it out, because the diagnostic system and everything's in there. Some of them have hidden processors. So to run a car, it takes quite a few processors. Some cars have a dozen processors in them. And any extra processor space, the engineers are going to use. So sometimes it's the processor that's behind that unit, you know, they're using part of it for functions. So you take it out and then part of the car dies. So you can't. So what's cropping up now, though, are interface devices to leave that in the car and then translate that signal back into something that the amplifiers can use. So, and we were just talking about this today, car audio, the sound of most car systems is pretty good today. So you go and you listen to it, but car companies aren't going to spend any more money that they have to, not a quarter of a penny more than what they have to. So they kind of figured out a volume level that the systems play to, and all of the speakers, the amplifiers, everything in the car is designed to hit that particular level. And that's why you'll notice at low levels, it sounds really good, and there's a lot of bass and things. And the louder you turn it, it doesn't really seem to get too much louder. The bass kind of stays right there. The mids and highs might get louder, but it just, that oomph that it seemed like it had at lower volume just doesn't go anywhere. And that's just how they design it, you know, because that's all the money that they want to put in that thing. So by having the interfaces, we can sell all of our stuff that hooks up to that.
Jonathan.
How have you adapted to the changes in both music taste, but also what the current generation wants? So I imagine our current generation expects more bass out of a lot of audio. Look at the speakers and headphones, it's mainly bass focused. Has that changed how you influence your builds of your products?
Yeah, I mean, it helped us at the beginning too. So when we first started doing the studio speakers, that was happening. So we'd kind of learn how to tune them to play the lower frequencies, so when the guys were doing their mixing, they could hear everything. And we also started doing some subwoofers to go along with the near field speakers. So what would happen is, like, the Beastie Boys, Run DMC, some of those guys used our speakers. They knew what it sounded like, but when some other people come in that didn't know what it sounded like on these speakers, they need to hear it on a bigger system. So it pushes the stuff a little harder. So we had learned that, and then as the car thing started to come, we just applied that and tried to stay ahead of the curve. So most of our speakers will play really low and not break.
Nice to meet you, and I'm glad you're here. Thanks for sharing. Question related to the next stage of technology when you start thinking about IoT and how that's going to affect the car audio side as well as other potential niches for you guys. And follow-up to that is the workforce and talent, the skills to help through that technology change. What does that look like for you here in Oklahoma or in Oklahoma City specifically?
Could you repeat the question too, so that it goes on the live screen?
Ours too long.
You're gonna have to hit that one again. So.
Internet of Things in the car audio industry and what that looks like for a company like yours. And then second of all, do you have the talent and the skill in the workforce here into that technology phase?
It's
Repeat the question so that we can hear it on the live screen.
so in a nutshell, is there talent locally to help with the next phase of where audio is going and adapting to cars and things? And there's enough for a company like us, because we don't need whole departments, to look at the in and out devices and how to work with the cars. So yeah, for us there is, because we're only looking at a couple of people. But when you look at where it's going now, like you heard, I don't know if you guys know, like Samsung bought Harman. So Harman was before the largest audio company in our industry, and Samsung just swooped them up, right? And they bought them not for all of those brands that they have in JBL and the Pro Audio and concerts and stadiums. They bought them for the couple thousand people that they have that just do the car programming. So that at that scale, I don't know what's here in town, but that's definitely where the whole future is going. We don't interface that much with the tech guys. So
With that said, how difficult would it be to compete with, say, like the big boys today, create a new audio company or a new headphone company in today's market here in Oklahoma City?
So Grayson's asking, with all that said, how difficult would it be to start a new audio company?
To compete with Samsung, Harman Kardon.
Yeah, to compete with Samsung.
yeah, I don't know, how does a company even get to that size these days, starting off now, but
Like if you were to start over today, what would you change differently?
the difficult part today is the marketing and how to navigate where things are sold. And it just takes resources. So if you're talking about like in a Samsung and places that have to move an enormous volume, then it's going to be sold online. It's going to be sold through some of the big stores. But you see what's happening to our retail segment today. I mean, with malls and stores, and I mean it's really devastating a lot of industries, and so they're having to reimagine themselves. And I don't have a good answer for you, because like when we go to trade shows, that's the question that gets thrown out everywhere right now in the big conferences, is like, how do you navigate the marketplace today? The race to zero on products and product costs is it's just wiping stuff out. It's just crazy. So we'll go, like I'll go to the Hong Kong Electronics Show. They'll have some products on display, these companies. And within 3 or 4 months from the time that they're offering it for sale to OEM, manufacturing, it's on Amazon for virtually the same price that they were selling at OEM. And what happens is, because it's a tough marketplace out there, they might sell 10,000 or 50,000 Wiggets to somebody here, and they found that at the price they bought them, and they were trying to get normal markups for them, it just doesn't sell. And they try for a few months, and then they're not going to just sit on that. So they decide to dump it. So they'll go to Amazon and places, and they'll just try to get their money out of it. Well, it's just dumped in mass, and there's just no profit. So now the company that was making those things, they still got a bunch of those. that they can't sell to any other manufacturers because this guy just wiped out what market there was. So now they're selling them on AliExpress and through directly to Amazon. So a lot of the times when you go to these searches on Amazon and you see these cool little audio products or whatever it is, and you'll see, sometimes they'll ship it and fulfilled by Amazon, but often it's just shipped for China, like for free as well. So it's just, it's guerrilla warfare out there right now.
I don't think we have time for any more questions, but we will be around for some beer and some more food. I think.
And a prize.
I think.